In the quiet town of Fulton County, a storm was brewing in the courthouse. The air was thick with anticipation as the courtroom buzzed with whispers and dismissive glances. At the center of it all stood Mabel Thompson, a 75-year-old woman accused of fraud and obstruction of justice. The prosecutor smirked, the judge sneered, and the gallery murmured in amusement. To them, Mabel was just another helpless old woman, a pawn in their legal game. But little did they know, she was about to turn their world upside down. Mabel Thompson was no stranger to being underestimated. At 75 years old, she had spent a lifetime in the shadows of other people's expectations. When she found herself standing in the defendant's seat at the Fulton County Courthouse, accused of fraud and obstruction of justice, the courtroom reacted with amusement and dismissal. The prosecutor barely looked at her. The judge raised an eyebrow in humorous disbelief, and the gallery murmured in entertainment. To them, she was just another old woman caught up in a scandal she couldn't possibly understand. But Mabel Thompson had a secret weapon, a sharp mind honed by years of listening to her late husband, a defense attorney, and studying the intricacies of trial law on her own. She had spent decades preparing for a moment like this, though she never imagined it would come as the accused. When the prosecutor confidently laid out his case, claiming she had falsified documents and obstructed justice, Mabel remained silent, watching with a growing sense of unease. But it wasn't fear. She knew the truth, the cracks in their story, and the gaps they had missed. From the moment Judge Harold Bennett leaned back in his chair and gave her that smirk, Mabel felt an unsettling but familiar calm wash over her. This wasn't her first courtroom. She wasn't intimidated by the glossy wood desks, the sharp suits, or the smug attitudes. What unsettled her was the way people assumed they knew her, the way they took one look at her weathered face and slight hunch and decided she was incapable of understanding, let alone defending herself. "Do you think you're some kind of legal expert?" Judge Bennett asked, his voice thick with condescension. He glanced down at her over the rim of his glasses, lips curled in a mocking smile. "This isn't a Sunday book club, ma'am." Mabel didn't flinch. The chuckles from the gallery faded as she simply stood, her back straight, hands folded in front of her. Inside, her pulse quickened, but her exterior remained composed. This was it, her moment. She had spent years training for this, not to be a defendant, but to dismantle a case, if it ever came to that, and it had. The prosecutor, Alexander Hart, stood next. He was young, confident, and at that moment entirely convinced of his victory. The courtroom seemed to lean in as he spoke, his voice dripping with the certainty of a man who had delivered this speech 100 times before. "For your honor," Hart began, flipping through his papers, "the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant deliberately falsified documents to commit fraud and obstructed justice when confronted." The words stung, but Mabel kept her face impassive. She had heard this kind of thing before a prosecutor with a polished performance, convinced he held the upper hand. But she had spent too many years in legal conversations not to see the cracks in the story they were building. She knew what they had overlooked and what they hadn't even bothered to verify. When Hart dropped the name of Officer Gregory Miles, claiming he had personally seen Mabel withholding key documents, she felt a shift inside her. That was their key witness, the one who would supposedly seal her fate. The lie they were about to tell was their first mistake, the first thread to pull. She waited, watching them. She didn't need to rush. The prosecutor continued detailing the supposed events with mechanical precision, but Mabel was no longer listening to his words. She was calculating, anticipating the gaps in their case. When Hart finished, the judge turned to her lawyer, a young public defender who hadn't yet found his voice in the courtroom. Mabel placed her hand gently on his arm, signaling him to stop speaking. "I'll represent myself," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtroom. A stunned silence followed. It wasn't the decision itself that shocked them, but the certainty in her voice, the audacity of it. A 75-year-old woman accused of serious crimes, dismissing her appointed lawyer, and choosing to take on the entire legal system herself. Hart smirked, clearly amused by the thought of her playing lawyer. "This should be fun," he muttered under his breath. But no one was laughing anymore. Mabel's heart raced, not out of fear, but with a deep, growing focus. Every part of her training kicked into gear. Her mind moved faster than ever before, replaying her husband's voice as it often had in their living room late at night. "Never let them control the narrative, Mabel. Always stay a step ahead." She took a step toward the jury box, drawing all eyes on her. The moment hung heavy with anticipation, like the calm before a storm. She let the silence stretch, filling the room with an uncomfortable tension. It was time to show them exactly who she was. "Your Honor," Mabel began, her tone measured and calm, "before I begin, I would like to confirm something with the prosecution." Hart raised an eyebrow, clearly irritated but playing along. "Go ahead. You said Officer Gregory Miles personally saw me withholding documents, correct?" Mabel asked slowly. Hart nodded, though the smirk on his face wavered for just a second. "That's correct. His testimony is in the report." Mabel took another step forward, her eyes locking with his. "And that testimony is written in his report, correct?" she repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Yes," Hart said, his jaw tightening now. Mabel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to move to dismiss Officer Miles's testimony as evidence." The courtroom went still. The murmurs from the gallery faded into the background as the judge squinted at Mabel. Her calmness only heightened the tension. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a sheet of paper, a single page, with a meticulous handwritten note. "On what grounds?" the judge asked. "Because Officer Miles wasn't even assigned to this case at the time his report was filed," Mabel stated flatly. "In fact, his duty logs from that evening will show he wasn't even near the scene of the alleged incident." The prosecutor's face flushed a deep red. The gallery shifted, whispering to one another. Judge Bennett didn't react immediately, but Mabel saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Hart's grip on his papers tightened. "You're suggesting we verify the officer's duty logs?" Hart scoffed, still trying to recover. "Are you serious?" "Yes," Mabel said simply. "If Officer Miles was where he claimed to be, the duty logs will confirm it. But if he wasn't, then his entire testimony falls apart." A long pause followed. The weight of Mabel's words settled into every corner of the room. Even the judge seemed momentarily unsure. It was a small shift, but it was enough. Hart hesitated, his confidence faltering for the first time. "I suppose we could verify the logs," he muttered, trying to regain control. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Over the next hour, Mabel calmly and systematically picked apart every piece of evidence the prosecution had presented. She questioned witnesses, discredited documents, and exposed the lies buried in the details. What they had thought was airtight slowly unraveled. The fraud they accused her of was nothing more than a clerical error, and the obstruction of justice was a simple miscommunication in paperwork. By the time she finished, the courtroom was silent. Not a single person moved. Even the judge, a man who had built his reputation on unwavering authority, looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and respect. And then, as the final gavel came down, Judge Bennett spoke, his voice softer than before. "Case dismissed." The words echoed through the room, but Mabel stood still, allowing the weight of the moment to settle around her. She had won not just the case, but the respect she had been denied for years. The judge, still holding his gavel, looked at her with a new understanding. "Mrs. Thompson," he said quietly, his voice almost apologetic, "ever thought about law school?" Mabel gave a small, amused smile, a hint of pride in her eyes. "I'm already there," she said, her voice steady and sure. And with that, Mabel Thompson walked out of the courtroom, her chin lifted high, not as the frail, underestimated woman the world thought she was, but as a legal genius who had just proven that no one, no matter their age or appearance, should ever be underestimated. As Mabel Thompson stepped out of the courtroom, the weight of the victory didn't sink in immediately. She had won, no doubt about that. But more than the case, she had won her own redemption. For years, she had lived in the quiet shadows of other people's assumptions, never given the chance to show her true strength. Today, she had erased that doubt, not with a loud proclamation, but through steady confidence and an unwavering belief in her own knowledge. As she walked down the courthouse steps, Mabel felt something shift within her. It wasn't the validation she expected, but something deeper, a quiet, unshakable sense of pride. She had done this on her own. She hadn't just proven them wrong. She had proven to herself that age, appearance, and circumstance would never define her. That was the lesson she had learned. Never let anyone underestimate you, especially when they think they know your story. It's not about proving others wrong. It's about proving to yourself that your worth is yours to define. As the crowd bustled around her, Mabel lifted her chin slightly, a faint smile playing on her lips. She wasn't just walking away from a courtroom victory. She was stepping into a future where she was no longer invisible. If you found Mabel's journey inspiring, don't forget to subscribe to Soul Story and like and share this video. Help new real-life stories reach 1,000 subscribers so we can continue bringing you incredible stories like this one.